And I want to take a few minutes to go over the assigning labels. So a couple people have gotten their stuff into KeyShot, so taking the next steps of actually taking the labels that you built and applying them to the drone, and then rendering out some animations and some still images from here. So the first thing I'm going to do before I get into any label stuff is I just want to get my lighting and my materials down first. So, and I've talked about this before on the product one, but just to kind of go over that again. All the materials that you could assign are over here, but obviously you can make more, you can customize these things. These aren't just, you know, one-off type things. They're kind of separated into different areas. You know, architectural, paint, cloth and leather, cutaway stuff. But you can also search. So if you're looking for a plastic, you can just type that, and then down here will be all these different kinds of plastics. The fancier you go, the longer things are going to take. So if you were to do like a realistic looking glass like this, that would take longer to render out than if you just did a hard plastic, okay? Also, if you were to do something like glass, let's say on the drone's body, this isn't set up yet, but it would, you know, there wouldn't be anything there for it to be glass. It would just be, let me pick a different glass, this one. It would just be transparent and you would see through it, and that wouldn't really make sense. So if you ever did glass stuff, always consider that, because you want to make sure that whatever should be there is actually inside of it, okay? So the controls for this are the scroll wheel is your zooming, middle mouse button you can drag it around, and then left mouse button you can move. I constantly am using Alt and then doing that and nothing happens, so just it'll happen a million times. By default, it already separated all of our stuff into different materials. So I can grab them over here. You can see the materials are already laid out: prop top, metal, propeller, so on. Or I can just drag from here. So I'm going to go and grab copper. And I'm just going to drag this copper onto my wires that are inside there. And you'll see this constant like graininess that gradually gets better. This is very similar to how a lot of these softwares work when they're doing these photorealistic renderings. So as we move around, it's just updating, and then it has to do it again. The better your hardware is, typically the faster that process is, and obviously the lighter the model, the faster that would go too. I'm going to go metal here, and I'm going to do some brushed metal. I think on this would be better than what I had there. And it automatically deletes stuff, so if I had, you know, 50 things I dragged on, it's only keeping the latest ones. If I go over here, these are all the materials that are actually on my items in my scene, and it's obviously easy to see like which ones I haven't even touched yet: this metal, this prop top, and that blade guard. So don't be afraid of just trying stuff out. Just drop it on there and then see. Each one of the things we do drop on, we can just double click here to load the material there. Some of them will have colors, so this metal allows me to pick a different color if I want to choose the color of this metal here. Some will not. Some will have other things that are inside this list. Every item you drag onto there has different stuff. So like if I were to grab this red metal thing here, this is going to be something that has holes in it, like perforations. Obviously not really appropriate to this, but for some things maybe you'd want that. So if I double click it, there's still a color. And then if I switch over to the textures tab, this is where it's getting the bumpiness from, and this is where it's getting the opacity from. So if I needed to adjust any of these, I could click on those and come down here and play with any of these settings that are down here. Good. So jittering, distortion, okay. So just so you're aware that each one's going to have its own thing. The software is smart enough and quick enough that you don't have to worry about memorizing all the things. Just realize that there are different areas you want to jump into to tweak some of those things, okay? So I'm going to leave that as a metal brushed. I'm going to go into dark metal. I think this gunmetal would be cool. I'm just going to add that onto that rod in the middle. So I have two rods right in the middle of that one, and then I have this one here. There we go. And then the cap for this, I'm just going to go with a plastic. And I'll just grab this hard, rough plastic. And then the last thing that I have, zoom the correct way, are these fins. So I'm just going to go grab that and put that on there. All right, so maybe a little bit of variation. Everything is too, the same color. So let's go make that a little bit lighter gray. All right, so that's sufficient for now. Cool. Now for my lighting, I go to the Environments tab, and then these are all the environments that come with the software. You can actually go to the Downloads area, and then I believe it's this button, or no, it's not that button. New folder, import. So you can import, and you can go find new HDRs and drop them in too. So I found over my semesters of doing this that I've just started to create a folder for HDRs that I can then just start to use. And then now I have this new HDR. You can get those by just Google searching free HDRs. There's a website called HDR Haven. There's HDR Maps, HDR Labs. All of these I'll typically be able to grab images from. And then in here, oops, I always do that. It's right there. And then you can grab any of these. Now what these are doing is basically this is our lighting information. So instead of us adding individual lights, it's using the lighting information from this image to actually light up our scene, okay? So if we want our drone to look like it's outside, we could grab this image, and then our drone would have the lighting, the reflections of being in this kind of environment. Same thing here, all the way down the list, okay? Each of these will have a resolution to download. So obviously the smaller one, the lower the resolution, the bigger one, the higher. For this assignment, I wouldn't go over 4K. The bigger it is, it's also going to take longer to render out. So just be aware 4K is a good size to get. If you went with 8, you can see the file size jump here is enormous. And then if you went to 16, that's even bigger, okay? So if you stick with 4K, you should be good for what we're doing. So to get them into the scene, you just drag this into the scene. And now it's using the lights inside here to light up the drone. If I drag this one, you'll see a definite change because now we have different colors mixed into the background. And if I spin this around a certain way and zoom out, I can kind of get this to look like it's sitting on the floor. Drag a new one. And again, because this process is so quick, you don't need to memorize it. You just have to know that there's tabs here to play with, and then you can find something. For what we're going to be doing, you want to use a studio one. Okay, because I want this to look like an actual product shot that would be something you would see on the box of this thing. Some things to keep in mind, if I put this as all black, there's obviously nothing. Put it as all white, it's going to wash it out. Okay, you want to find something with good values, and for most of this, it literally is just trying stuff out, just seeing what does this one look like, what does that one look like, and going down the list until you find one that really looks good. And that'll all be based on how many reflections you have. Like this one here, we get a lot of reflection in there. What did I put on this? Just regular plastic. I'm going to roughen this up a bit. Pull that down. I'm not liking how reflective. Maybe it's this. It needs a bit more roughness. Yeah, I'm just not liking that one. These are the startup ones, so you can check those out if you want to get back. You can see that one doesn't look too good. All right, so I think I'm going to go with this one for now at least. Okay. Now you can also adjust these, which is awesome. These are basically just lights inside of this image that make it look like that. So if I go to the Environments tab here, there's all the lights. So if I go to the editor, you can actually move these around and change where the lighting is happening. Now the reason for that is, let's say I'm doing a character. So this is a character that I'm doing in the next level class. I want to have a very strong light on this side and a very soft light on that side. So as I built that HDR, I built a strong light on one side and a softer light on the other side. So same thing here. I may want to move my lights around to capture certain things. I may want to eliminate lights just by checking them off. There we go. So now there's no light, and then I can turn one light on and then just see what this does. So that's giving me kind of this overhead light. Here's screen reflection. I can come down here and change the brightness of it. really not doing much where we have it. There it goes. All right, let's turn on one of the side lights. There we go. Okay, and you can see the huge benefit of doing something like this versus just right inside Cinema, where we have to hit render every time. So that's kind of like a dramatic lighting there. If I want to add lights, I click the plus here, and it just creates a pin, and then I can move that pin around. I can change the radius, change the brightness, change the fall off. Okay, I'm not too concerned about the background at this time. I'm just looking at the lights themselves and what the lighting is doing on my object. All right, so that looks pretty good the way I have it there. I'm just going to leave that. I think I want to, I roughened this a bit too much because the other one, I'm going to sharpen that up some and sharpen this up some too. I think I'm also going to give the body, I think the body does want to be whiter, and these things, I'll give them a little bit of a color there. I'm really going to take this off and then pull this refractive index up, get a little bit more reflection in there. All right, that's good. Okay. So for the background, I'm going to go to camera now. Nope, not camera. I'm going to go to environment, switch back to settings. And then in here, right now I'm looking at the lighting environment. You can rotate this too, so if you want to rotate the entire thing, get different angles, you can do that. I'm going to go to a solid color, and now I basically just created a clean image. So think of Cinema, all the work we had to do inside there to add lights, create our stuff, put it inside there. Here, a button click, and we have what we had there, right? Just a solid image. You can even do a backplate image and bring an image into the scene. I'm just going to grab a texture. This is not what I'm going to use, but there's a texture here of a piece of paper, right? I could go into Illustrator or Photoshop. I could draw out a texture. I could bring that in just like I did this one here. There's also a textures area. You can drag stuff from here and drop it onto there. Oops, sorry, backgrounds, and drop it onto there. Okay, so again, if you're trying to create a certain look to your drone, that's where those things are. For us, we're just going to keep it straight and just do a solid color. It just helps our drone stand out a bit much, okay, a bit more. My drone is on the ground. I can see where the shadows are. If this is off, I don't get any ground shadows and he's just floating. We can also do occlusion ground shadows, which means that wherever the drone's body is, the darkness that would happen underneath it from light just not getting to it would show up. We also have ground reflections we could add. I typically don't add these here because they're way too crisp. It just looks weird. I could also change the color of this. I think I want to go with maybe a darker color like that. Maybe even further darker. Let's go. That looks cool. I like that. Flatten the ground. Doesn't really, we don't really notice anything here. Sometimes the ground is too small, so if this is set to 2, the ground is this tiny square right there, and you just need to bump it up. So there's 100, still too small. It was at 9,000. There we go. So now plenty big, it looks nice, the shadows look nice and soft. You'll see at 1,000, the shadows look kind of chunky. Doesn't look like it's updating any, so definitely at 9,000, I get nice shadows, the scene is big enough, it's good. Always jump around. So if I decide I want to update a material, I can jump back and update a material. I want to update the light, jump back and update the lighting. Okay, nothing is ever locked in. I don't like how red these are compared to this, so I'm just going to double click that, click here, and then just use the eyedropper to grab that red. And then maybe just boost it a little bit. There we go. Okay, I could have also drugged the same material onto those, but I wanted to keep them separate. So that looks pretty good. There is a lighting tab here. This is controlling basically our render settings for how it's calculating the lighting. If I go to performance, you'll see that some of our features go away. If I set it to basic, we get some of those back. I set it to product, we'll get some other stuff added in here. All these are doing are turning on these things: ground illumination, self-shadowing, global illumination. And then there's some other stuff that it's turning on right there, okay? So these are just presets. I can come down here and check buttons on and off too. For my camera, this is the camera that I'm currently looking through. You can adjust things like the distance from where we're at. So as I move this, obviously it's adjusting the camera. As I move this, it's rotating it. As I do this, it's going to change the direction. Same exact thing as me doing all of these. That's what these are doing, okay? Apart from what we're going to do, there's a bunch of stuff you can do as far as camera animations. So one of the projects I did last year was we worked on that torch for Macomb County. Part of that is they wanted all these renderings of the torch. So I wanted a camera panning up. I wanted a camera spinning around. I wanted a camera zooming in. I wanted all these things to happen. So I was able to do camera animations inside here to get all that stuff to happen. So you can do that as well for other stuff. For this one, we're going to keep it pretty straight. And then I'm going to jump to the image area, and then this is the size of our image. Okay, so we'll come back to this in a second. Other stuff that we have is bloom. So bloom is where you have a specular, you have a really sharp highlight. Let me jump back to my character here. There's a really bright area right here and right there, okay, and even like around this area. If we have a bloom, typically we're going to have this kind of like glowing that would happen in those areas that are super bright. So here, there's nothing right now that's bright, so we don't really see a bloom. As I pull this intensity up, come on, 2. Some of these have built-in values you just can't see. There we go. So we're not really getting a huge amount of bloom anywhere. It's just kind of like the entire thing is. I'm going to jump to my environment real quick. I'm going to click on one of my lights. There, I think. And then I'm just going to take the brightness up to an enormous amount. There we go. Okay, so now you can see these little things around here. That's all the blooming happening. I'll make the radius a lot bigger. There we go. So now you can see this bloom happening on there, and then I can play with my threshold to control what's actually blooming. The lower the threshold, the more stuff blooms. The higher the threshold, the less is going to bloom. 25, 10, 15, somewhere in the middle there. There we go. So now we have this. So if you see a car, a nice picture of a car on a bright sunny day, typically you'll see that kind of glowing on the hood from the reflection of the sun. I don't typically do that inside here, so I'm just going to leave that. There's also a vignette. Again, something that you could do inside here, but really we would just do something like that inside of Photoshop. So I'm just going to ignore that as well. Chromatic aberration is something else we'll get into in other classes. All right, so let me jump back to my environment. Let me jump back to that light, set this back to 3, which I think it was at. Kind of like it a bit brighter. Let's go to 5. Let's go to 8. 10. All right, 10 seems good. I like that. Okay, the idea with your lighting is to find a good balance. You don't want anything super dark, completely black, you can't see it. And you don't want anything super white that it just blows out the values. So this seems pretty good. I would just have to watch these areas because these seem like they're going to be maybe a little bit too bright. Okay, you can kind of see those things happening right there. Let's go to 7 on this. Let's go to 6 just to be safe. Okay. All right. So now adding labels to this. So I'm going to jump to Illustrator, and I'm going to grab a label I want to add. So these are all the labels I drew out. Actually, I'll grab the battery one. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm just going to go into a new document, and I'm just going to save this out. So the document size, the higher the resolution, the more crisp that detail is going to be. So I'm going to make all my images here 1024 by 1024. And then I'm just going to scale this item up. Now when I get to my logo, I'll probably make that one bigger. This one's going to be small, so unless I'm like super zoomed in on that, I shouldn't have an issue. So now I'm going to save this. Sorry, not save. I'm going to export this as. Put this into my drone folder, put this into my textures folder, and I'm going to save this as a ping and call it what it is. So this is battery indicator And I already have one there, so I'm just going to leave it as 1. I'll save this as high resolution. I want to save it as transparent, otherwise the white will come in, and we will see that. And then I'm going to hit OK. So now I'm going to go to my material. I'm going to click on where I want the battery to be. So I want it to be on this shape. I'm going to go to labels, but just so you can see, there's something called textures. If I were to have done all my UV layout inside of Cinema, I could bring in those textures right here. I would just go to diffuse, bring in the texture, and it would drop it right on there. As we're laying this on top of the rest of our animation, or the rest of our model, I'm going to go to labels, and here I can add a bunch of labels. Here I can only add this one diffuse, okay? So I'm going to go to add label texture, and then I'm going to go find my stuff. I believe it's here, and here, there. Textures, and battery indicator 1. Okay. Now this part will be a little bit confusing. So there's my label right there. Now it doesn't know where I want to put the label. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on the battery area. I'm going to turn off some of my other features here, just so this goes faster. There we go. So I'm in performance mode. There's no shadows. A lot quicker. Obviously I can spin around and see stuff. And I'm just going to click right there. And what happens is that label just jumps right to wherever I clicked. And then you can rotate it, you can move it, whatever you need to. Just be careful, because if you're trying to spin around and you click on the model here, it will actually drag the texture over to that area. So I've spent plenty of time moving stuff into the exact spot and then doing that on accident and then trying to hit undo, and it doesn't undo. Okay, so just be aware of that. You always want to click and drag away from the model. All right, so that looks pretty good. You can resize it by grabbing this and then just, again, dragging it around. If you notice it's too grainy, like maybe it's already too pixelated, just jump back into Illustrator, make the document bigger, and then save it out as a higher resolution document. That looks good right where it's at, so I'm just going to hit this OK button. And so now that's just ingrained right into that label. Now when we put a label on something, it's hard to see because we have these. Let me just scoot that down. The label itself has properties also. So this label has the texture right there. And then it also has like roughness and refraction. So I'm going to just grab this real quick, go to the kind of material this is, and I'm going to make this metallic just so we can see what this will do. Actually, let me just go to metal here and just say, there we go. Notice as I drag, it says hold Alt to retain textures and Control to retain labels. So I'm going to hold Control and then drag, and then it should just drop it on top with the label still there. There we go. So if I go back to my label and I go back to this, notice how the label itself isn't reflecting. It's just like a label, like actually like a sticker on top of something really shiny. If I come down here to my label properties, and I start to pull that refractive index up, I'll start to get some reflection on there. If I pull this roughness up, it will then soften that reflection a lot. There we go. So now I've added a lot of reflection to it. Let me pull this down so we can see. There we go. So you can kind of see it there. It's not amazingly great. I could also adjust the coloring of the label, so if I needed to brighten the color some or adjust the contrast, you can do that in here as well. You can do things like I accidentally have it the wrong direction. You could flip it, so now it's flipped the other direction, or flip it vertically if you need to. Okay. Now one thing that we do need to adjust as well is if I were to spin around my drone, okay, so we don't see it in this case, but sometimes, oh there it is. Sometimes your texture, your label, actually shoots straight through it onto the other side, okay? And the reason for that is because it doesn't know that we just want it here. Sometimes you may want a label on each side of your item, so that's why you would have that. So what we do is we tell it to be single-sided, so we have it be single-sided. There we go. And then let's see if that got rid of it. Oops. Yep, that did get rid of it. Okay. The other thing that we might need to do sometimes is change this depth. Okay. Let's say that we had a surface, so we have this face and this face here, and we tell it to be single-sided, it'll only do that one side. But if we had a glass and we had a surface here and we had a surface there, it would actually put it on any surfaces that are facing the same direction. So the label would be like on the outside of the glass and the inside of the glass. Then I would use this depth to control how far I want my projection to be in there. Okay. So if you do get that, those are typically the two things you need to play with. I'm going to add another label to this. And textures. There's my power button. And then where do I want my power button to be? I'll put that way over here. Move texture, there we go. And then shrink that down, scoot it over, and then hit OK. Now if I don't like the color of this, obviously I could jump into Illustrator, I could change that. Or I could jump back to my label properties and then say blend with color and then choose a color here. And it doesn't want to work in this case. Why aren't you working? Label texture. Probably because it's black that it doesn't want to. If I take the brightness up some, will it do it? No. All right, for this one it's being stubborn. I would just jump back to Illustrator and do it there. Interesting. I will save, yes. There we go. Okay. And then all my other labels, I would do the same thing. Add the label, Rancor logo. Drop this here. Make it big. And you'll see this is one of those cases where obviously the logo needs to be flipped. So I'm going to jump down to flip horizontally. And there it is. I'll make sure it's also one-sided. And then I'll also make sure that the depth of this is set to maybe 10. Oops, see, it's cutting it off there, so maybe that's too much. There we go. 20 is good. Okay, cool. And then obviously I need to fix the power button here. This one I never said to be one-sided, so turn that two-sided off. That's gone. And then I don't want this metal on here. That was just a demonstration. So white, oops, plastic. Actually, some of these that are cool, like car paint. There we go. And hold Control so it stays with my labels. And then from here, I'm just going to choose paint. Metallic paint, there it is. I'm going to sample that red again and then just pull it up some. I think I also want to take this one and do the same kind of thing, except I'm going to make this coppery color that's in here. And then the same thing on these. I'm just picking colors that might look cool. There we go. Awesome. Now this is why you might want to spin your lights around, because as I'm placing my textures, I may have placed my textures in spots I don't see. Like this might be the good side for my lighting. But I placed all the textures on the other side, so, you know, I may want this to be the main side that I see. And if that's the case, I need to go back to my environment, I need to go back to my settings, and then I would just rotate this around to get the lighting to be in the right spot. Okay, now that also comes in with my animation that I set up. So I need to check that as well, make sure that, come on, that as it lifts off the ground, and I zoom out a bit so I can see it, I want to make sure that it goes, into an area that I'm actually going to have the video camera. And then what do I want my end frames to look like? So I'm kind of playing with all of these things at the same time. Like, that's pretty good there. Maybe I'll switch it a little bit more. All right. So that's sufficient. Okay. Good. All right. So now I have some labels on there. I have some materials on here. I'm going to go to my image and I'm going to render out two things. One is going to be a high-res still. Typically, it's going to be wider than it is taller, so it's going to be 3,000 pixels wide by 2,400 pixels tall. We can't punch that number into here. KeyShot will freak out. Okay, just to show you, if I type in 3,000, it'll just jump back to this. Okay. I don't know why my window is still maximized. Enable docking. Let me come on. I think I accidentally opened a second version of KeyShot. Window, yes I did. Let's exit that one. All right, I'm not sure why it's not letting me undock this, but I'll just work around it. So what I need to do is I need to set up the resolution here. So 3,000 wide by 2,400. If I typed in 300 by 240, that's the same proportions, okay, as far as our still would go. So that would work. Typically I'll do that and I will link them, and then I can play with this number here to make this as big as I can get it so that I can still see it in proportion. All right, so 743 looks like it's about as big as I can make that. 740, just so we have a little bit of, or 720. So we have a little bit of border there. So all I'm doing now is setting it up for what I want my still to look like. So this isn't even worrying about the animation part. This is just worrying about the still. I'm going to jump to my camera. I'm going to go to my lens setting. Notice how if I change this to 20 millimeters, we have this really distorted version of this. I set it to 200. We have a little bit flatter version. Obviously, you want to find a good spot in the middle that looks good for your drone. Okay, we want the whole thing in there. And all I'm doing is trying to find a cool angle to show this off. I'm going to turn on my basic again so I can see the ground. Notice I have a little light right here, kind of pulling it away from the background. Another light right there, pulling it away from the background. Think of your photography class, the same stuff that we would pay attention to, we're paying attention to here. So that looks like a pretty decent shot of the drone. I do want to do my still as the blades are spinning. So I'm going to go to about here before it's lifted off the ground. The blades are spinning, and then I need to turn something else on so I can see the blades spinning. So under render, I'm going to hit motion blur. And what this does is it actually blurs out those blades so that they actually look like they're moving. I'm going to shift my camera a little bit just so we can see this. But now you can see that they have some blurriness happening there. I'll put my camera back where it was. There we go. So that looks like a decent shot for my drone. I'm going to go to render, and then I'm going to go to the still area and then give this a name. Sarcona drone render. Put this into my folder. KeyShot defaults to the C drive or wherever it decides it's going to save stuff to. So I'm putting this inside my images folder. It'll be called that. The end resolution I have to punch in here. So this is where I type in the actual 3000 by 2400, and then it will render this out. I'm also going to do all render passes and then add to PSD. And then under my options, I'm going to make sure that this number here is pretty big. I believe the default is 32 or 64. If we leave it at that, in some of these areas you'll make it a lot of noise, especially with like the motion blur of the propellers. It would look pretty horrible. 128 is a pretty good number, so I'm going to leave it at that. and then I hit render. What KeyShot's then going to do is open up a second screen, and it's going to render your stuff out. This might take a while to do. Okay, so there's my drone. It's rendering right now, 1% done. Down here at the bottom, you can see where it says rendering kilobytes per second, or seconds, and then it says 4 samples. So this 128 is how many samples it needs to do. So what I'm going to do is I can just kind of watch this. If I get to the point where it's at, let's say, 80 samples and it looks nice and clean, I can zoom in and I don't have any like disgustingness there. I could stop it at that point. Okay, you can hit the stop here and then just save it. Typically, I'll just like walk away and then come back later. Okay, so I'm not going to let this do this while we're lecturing. We're just going to stop it. I don't need to save it. So it's still thinking about stopping, and then there it goes, there it goes. Okay, so that would be my still. I'm going to make a new camera, and I'm just going to call this still. That's my still camera. Now I'm going to make another new camera, and this will be my animation. And if I go into my scene, here's my cameras, the free camera, the still camera, and the animation camera. Okay, now the reason for this is that if I'm in the animation camera and I'm way back here, but I need to fix my still, I can just double click that still and jump back to that camera. If I need to go back to the animation, I can double click that, but I forgot that I did that the wrong way. Okay, the still one is good, I can leave that. I have to go to my free camera, move this around, there we go, and set up where I want this animation to be. So not there, let's get in. Let's get a bit closer. Oh, let's also fix our image size here. So this is the default image size. So I'm just going to duplicate this, and then I'm going to call this one anim. And again, it just makes our job easier so that if we ever need to jump back to this, we can jump back to this and then not have to re-type settings in. Our rendering will be 960 by 540. Same problem. It's not going to render at 960 by 540. It's not going to let us punch that in here. So I type in 96. Oops, it's not going to let me do that either. 480 by 540, 270. There we go. That's half of what that number is. Then I can make this the same thing. Just make that 700. There's my animation frame. There we go. So that looks pretty good like that. Maybe I can shove it off to one side. So you'll see I'm just kind of lining it up to where I want the camera to be. I may want to widen the focal length a little bit on this one. All right, that's good. If it cuts off at the end, that's fine. There we go. Cool. So now I can do my second camera, which will be my animation camera. And now I have my still one, and then I have my animation one. Okay. You can see the blade spinning. That's good. So then I jump back to render. I jump back to my output. This time I'm going to go to the animation area. Yes, I know that. I'm not going to do video output because we'll bring that into After Effects. I set my resolution here, 960, 540. I want to do the entire duration, which is this whole animation part. We're doing frames. Sarcona drone keyshot is good. I'm going to move this into the correct folder. Whoops. Not there either. There. 10 drone images. And then this one, we're not going to worry about the render passes or adding it to the PSD. I'm just going to leave this as a straight TIFF rendering sequence. Okay. The same stuff that I showed before about going into Photoshop and playing with your layers, so you can take a rendering that looks kind of like this, which is pretty boring, and then being able to tweak it. You can do that in After Effects. It's just a lot more work to do. And for the time that we have, I don't think we'll have the time to do that. But if you wanted to do that, if you wanted to go into After Effects, definitely set this to 32-bit. Definitely do the render passes. Don't do them adding to the PSD. We'll do them separately. It'll be easier. And then render your stuff out. Okay. So if you don't want to do that, I'm just going to use as TIFF. Options, make sure these are so good, and then we hit render. And then this is going to do the same thing as before. It's just going to do one frame at a time. And obviously, because they're smaller images, these samples are going to go a lot quicker. Now, stuff I want to look for when I do this is obviously making sure that, number one, I pick the right camera. I could have very easily jumped into the wrong camera. Two, I want to make sure that the animation's there, make sure the textures are there. All of those things should move with it. So as the drone lifts off the ground, my labels, which are right here, come on, it's not letting me zoom in because I'm already zoomed in, those should move with it. We should also see the propellers kicking up speed and see some motion blur on those. And then once it's done, the same process we've done with all of our other animations before, going into After Effects, making it into a movie, and then turning it in. Okay, so I'm going to stop this. Stop. That one stopped a lot quicker. And then when you turn this in, you're going to do a save package. Okay, this will bring all of your model and textures all together. So you'll turn the package file in. Sorry, Keyshot drone. And I wish it would just put it right exactly where I wanted it. Why do you always have to do this? Keyshot drone. There we go. Oops. There we go. So there's the drone bundle that's saving out. The nice thing about this is, let's say a year from now you want to open it up. You double click that package, it opens up Keyshot, and everything is still there. It doesn't have to relink everything back together. If we didn't and we just used our Keyshot file, it would look for the model, it would have to relook for all the textures. Here, everything is right there. Everything is inside this package. Now this is pretty big, 145 megabytes, but that's just how big they are. So you'll turn in your Keyshot file. You'll turn in your latest cinema file, so I don't need all of these, I just need the latest one. You'll turn in your movie, you'll turn in your still. Questions on the drone finishing it up? Nothing yet?